Welcome to Good Vibes, the podcast that brings the timeless beauty of Ishes Chayil into the rhythm of real life. Each week, we unpack one pasuk, not as a shir, but as a spark for honest conversations, refreshing insights, and a little Torah light you can carry with you. Because meaning shouldn't feel heavy, and connection doesn't have to wait for quiet. This is Good Vibes, for the Jewish woman who's doing a lot and still reaching deeper. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Good Vibes podcast. Today, we're going to discuss Pasuk Zayin, Mirza Shem. We're going to take an interesting twist or perspective on this pasuk that's not so typical, but I'm really excited to get into it. Okay, so Pasuk Zayin states, "Zavama sadeh v'tikacheu mipri kapeh natakerem." The translation of this is that she sets her mind on a field and acquires it. She plants a vineyard through the fruit of her handiwork. So, at first glance, this pasuk is talking about parnasa or hints to parnasa, right? She's getting a field, acquiring a field. She's working with their hands in the vineyard, and it's hinting to her labor or the fruits of her labor. And because in Pasuk Hey, we recently spoke about parnasa and our role in parnasa, I actually wanted to take this pasuk into a different direction because there's so much to learn in every pasuk. So the word zamam, which we see in the pasuk right from the beginning, right? It says zamama, the root zamam, means to strategize or to plan or to plot. Often, zamima has a connotation of negative, of like scheming or a negative form of plotting, but also in different times in Tanakh, we see the word zamima used in positive as strategy or that somebody planned out, somebody strategized. So I want to take this pasuk and focus on the first word of it, focus on the word zamima and what that means to an Eshes Chayil. So the word zamima in this pasuk is specifically referring to parnasa, but I believe that the Eshes Chayil is zamima in many different areas in her life, and that she is somebody who is a planner, is a strategizer, who sees the bigger goal and comes up with a plan to achieve it, not just in parnasa. Of course, that's what the pasuk is referring to, but the Eshes Chayil is not somebody who just does something without thinking. She's a planner and a strategizer at her core, right? Thinking about where she is now, where she wants to go, and how she's going to get there. We see this with an Eshes Chayil in terms of her avodas Hashem, in her relationships in general, with her children, with who she is as a person, and especially with her relationship with her husband. So when I think of the word zamima, the strategizer, the planner, I almost envision the Eshes Chayil having like a game plan. Like maybe that's an intense way to say it, but having a game plan towards her life, having a game plan towards her avodas Hashem, towards her relationship with her children, towards her relationship with her husband, towards her tafkid in her community, having a game plan. And Hashem created Chava in order to be an Ezer Kenegdo. Her purpose was to be the wife of Adam. When I think of that, I think of how beautiful it is and how clear of a path we have, knowing that Hashem created us to be an Ezer Kenegdo. And I want to focus on this most precious and most central relationship in our lives, how we are strategizers and planners when it comes to being an Ezer Kenegdo and an Eshes Chayil. So luckily today I have Mrs. Faigy Pollock with us, who is going to share on this topic and enlighten us. Faigy Pollock is a visionary creator who empowers individuals through her transformative course, Unblock Your Way to Oneness. With an EFT practitioner certification, Faigy has guided hundreds of women through their marriage challenges. Additionally, Faigy is a high acclaimed Kala teacher dedicated to preparing young women for a joyous and fulfilling life with their future husbands. Her invaluable guidance equips these women with essential tools and insights to navigate the complexities of marriage and embark on a path of happiness and growth. Through her expertise, empathy, and commitment to personal growth, Faigy Pollock continues to significantly impact the lives of countless women, nurturing harmonious and loving relationships founded on the principles of the Torah's wisdom. Welcome, Faigy. Thank you so much for being here with us. It is such a schus.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very excited about this project.
Thank you so much. We're so excited. So maybe you could just start off by hearing from you what you think about this idea overall about an Eshes Chayil being strategic. And again, we know that the pasuk was referring to an Eshes Chayil being strategic when it comes to her parnasa. But what do you think, or what's your take about an Eshes Chayil being strategic, being a planner when it comes to her life in general?
So it's interesting because I think there's a lot of talk nowadays, at least in the circles that I'm in, a lot of talk about understanding the feminine and the masculine energies, understanding as women how we embody the vast majority of feminine energy, and how when the feminine and masculine energies work in harmony together, this thought, like it says, Zachar and Nekeva, Barostam, when those energies work in harmony, that's when we have the Bria in its tikkun form and the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended the world to be, this beautiful, dynamic, harmonious dynamic between Zachar and Nekeva at its different phases of development, starting at, Adam and Chava before the Chet, and then the fall, and then eventually coming back to, as we get closer and closer to the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'mher B'yameinu, there are going to be shifts happening in the world, which we're all experiencing. And I think that there's a lot of awareness today and a lot of talk about the feminine power, or the term used, like the holy feminine and what that means. Interesting, we even see this in the secular world. In fact, very often, as these changes come into the world, they first happen, interestingly enough, they first happen in the secular world. They come down. It's like these lights come down into the world and first show up in the like external expression of it, which is the side of the almost like the negative forces. And it's our avoda to take that light and bring it and use it properly. But talking of, let's say, the rise and the popularity of feminism, post feminism, and what it's done to the world and what it's done to women. And today, this awareness of coming back home to being a woman. And there's a lot of talk about a woman is present, a woman is just about being, right? Masculine energy is about doing, feminine energy is about being. And like everything in life, we could go off course if we don't have the guidance of our Gedolim, of our Mesorah, of the Torah, all its levels, the Pshat, the Remez, the Drush, and the Sod. And I feel like with all the talk today about a woman learning to just be, which granted, most women in 2025, we need to work on that. We've become so quote unquote masculine in our thinking and in our being that we all need to learn to embody that being presence. But at the same time, I often wonder if in this conversation, we're losing sight of the balance of being and doing. And when we read this pasuk of Eshes Chayil, pasuk after pasuk, we see a woman who is doing, right? And I think that this pasuk more than anything, Zamim asad v'tikacheyu, she doesn't just sit and wait for the sadeh to become hers. She has a very masterful, thought out plan on how she's going to orchestrate this and make it happen. And then, right, Zamim Masada Batikachayu, we pre Natakarim. It's interesting because in the Pasuk, actually, the word nata, we read it nat'ah, which is in female form. Nat'ah, she, the woman, planted the seeds of the vineyard. But really, it says nata without the hay at the end. There's the Kriyan Ksiv, which would be the masculine form. That could be, a whole conversation on its own. The Mefarshim say that it's not the way of a woman to plant a vineyard, but through her strategizing and her wisdom, the way I almost picture it is like that koch of a woman behind the scenes, beneath the surface, in her private, modest way, but the strategy and the thoughtfulness is there all along. So it's considered her vineyard as if she planted it, even though she didn't actually go out and plant it with her own hands, but it's her empowerment that planted the vineyard. And obviously the sadeh and the kerem, we could take it at face value, meaning her parnasa, the livelihood of her family. But obviously we're talking here about the spiritual sustenance of her family and ultimately the world. So it's interesting because there's this balance always going on between this idea, like we said, of learning to be a woman of just being and letting go and total surrender to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan. And yet at the same time, we see time and again, all the way back to our imahos, all the way back to Chava even, this like calculation and strategy. I mean, that's the Chet Adam Harishon. Like if we go back to the very, very beginning, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts Adam and Chava in Gan Eden, and he says to them, don't eat. You can eat from all the trees, eat from all the trees, partake from the pleasures of Gan Eden. Gan Eden is a sphere of spirituality, of pleasure beyond our comprehension, of clarity. Hashem's light is so big and so bright. And then Chava makes this calculation together with Adam, but she's the first one who partakes from the Eitz Hadas, where that if they bring the world to a darker place and then they shine Hashem's light there, that Kiddush Hashem will be so much greater. And that was coming from this longing to connect with Hashem in a deeper way. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu ultimately said, don't eat from the tree. That wasn't the Avodas Hashem that I wanted from you right now. It was the right action, but at the wrong time. And that's why they were punished. And we're all part of the tikkun of Tikkun Chet Adam Harishon and Chava. But even back to the beginning, we see over here that it wasn't just a matter of, oh, I'm in the Garden of Eden and I see a beautiful fruit and I want to eat it. Okay, I'm going to eat it. There's a thoughtful process of what can I do as a woman and how can I influence my man together to partake of something that will ultimately bring the world to a higher place. So again, we're not trying to say that was wrong, right? Like the Mefarshim teach, it was the right action at the wrong time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to give them the tree for, to eat from the Eitz Hadas later on when they had what they needed to be able to face that darkness of the world and bring the world to its tikkun. It wasn't the time yet. But then if we fast forward, look at someone like Sarah Imenu, right? It's interesting that the women in Tanakh, one after the other, seem to break the stereotype that we've been taught of the Jewish woman. Sarah Imenu, she turns to Abraham and without thinking twice, she just blurts out and says to him, send away Ishmael, send him away, right? Kilo yirash ben ha'amazos ibni Yitzchak.
And that was after she told Avram Avinu to bring in another wife, meaning both times she was very active.
Exactly. Nachon, nachon. So that, and then to send him away. And then we have Yitzchak and Rivka. Yitzchak literally goes behind her husband's back, right? What marriage counselor would give a woman that eitzah? Go behind your husband's back. Don't be honest with him, right? No, because she had a vision. She knew that there was a Kal Yisrael to create. And she knew that Yitzchak was seeing the reality not completely the way it was. And she sends Yaakov to get the brachos, right? And then we have Rachel and Leah. Rachel on her own decides to give Leah the simanim because she didn't want her sister to be embarrassed. We see time and time again how these women who are our mothers, it's in our bones. They one after the other were zamima. There was a mizima. It's interesting that the word zima or zamima in Hebrew, it's almost like to have a sneaky plan. Like it almost has a negative connotation. Okay? The term that comes to my mind is what we call holy chutzpah, right? To be able to get up and say, no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no, 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 no. I'm going to intervene. Hashem, I am going to intervene. And for a woman to be able to do that and to hold on to both ends of total surrender to Hashem's plan, and at the same time to get up with that holy chutzpah and say, there's a field, and I want that field because I know that this field will bring bracha into my family. And that field, you can fill in the blank, whatever it means for you. It can mean the physical field of the woman who's that businesswoman who's buying a field, all the way to the emotional and spiritual wealth that you're going to bring to your family through you. It's such a fine line that we walk as women. And from the little bit that I read in the Mefarshim and just from the way the connection that I feel to this pasuk, I think it's teaching us this point, to be able to use that power in a balanced way, in a healthy way. So to first be able to completely surrender to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan, and then from a place of so much anaba, to show up and say, Hineni. Hineni. Here I am. I'm here, Hashem, to serve you, to do your will, and I'm going to come up with a plan on how to do that.
That's beautiful. It's so eye-opening that you were sharing about the masculine and the feminine and how the pasuk itself has a kriya and a ksiv. I didn't even know that when I was looking into this pasuk, but how apropos. And there's a different way of writing and saying it out loud and using both of those, using that koach of being and still having that koach of strategizing and planning, again, almost behind the scenes in a tznius way, in a modest way, in a way of solely serving Hashem and coming from a place of anava, but seeing the bigger picture, like what you were saying with Rivka, I knew that Rivka did. So how would you recommend bringing that koach into our lives, especially when it comes into having the ultimate relationship with our husbands?
So it's interesting. I heard a great line from one of my great teachers. And she said, people will often come to her and say, it's not fair. Why are we always doing the work when it comes to marriage? You post a class on marriage, you're gonna fill rooms and rooms of women. How many men are gonna come to Shalom Bayis class? Very few, unfortunately. It's not fair. I'm feeling resentful. It's not fair. And she answered something which is so simple, but I think there's so much wisdom and depth to it. She said, in most households, if you go to IKEA and buy a new cupboard, right, unless you're hiring IKEA to come put it up for you, usually who's the person erecting these shelves and these cabinets? Who's moving the heavy furniture? It's often the men. Why is that? Because the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu built their body, they're strong, they have muscle mass, they're physically built for hard physical labor. So Hashem created men with strong physical muscles. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the woman with strong emotional muscles. Our nefesh has the ability to move mountains emotionally, something that men struggle with. It's a feminine trait to be able to do this inner work, to go deeper and excavate and go deeper and deeper, and to be able to do this work and never, ever give up. We see this all the way back. You know, I love to quote this Gemara. Anyone who's ever heard me speak before, I'm sure has heard me teach this Gemara. It's also Mender's about the Nashim Tzidkanios in Mitzrayim, who at the end of the day were able to reconnect with their husbands in such a beautiful, wholesome way, in ways that when you read the Gemara, everyone should look it up themselves. It flies in the face of anything we've ever been taught. And here it is, these women were able to reconnect with their husbands and then to continue Klal Yisrael through their connecting with their husbands. And those were the children that were able to point first at the splitting of the sea and recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because these were children of Geula. The Maharal writes about it. It's very emotional, very beautiful. And I think it's important for women to know this because it says that the neshamos of the women in Mitzrayim, the holy Jewish women in Mitzrayim, will be misgalgel, will be reincarnated in the women prior to the coming of Mashiach. Now, we all want to believe Chakala b'cholim shiavo. Every day that goes by, we're definitely getting closer. So we don't know if it's going to be today, tomorrow, in a few hundred years, but we are definitely towards the end. So I would rather and think it's me that I have that spark in my neshama and therefore I have a responsibility. I'd rather make that mistake than say, it's for sure not me. Who am I? Why should I be a Gilgal of those women? And then live my life and then look back and regret. So I feel like we're all on a mission. And just like these women in Mitzrayim had that koach to zamem masad v'tikachei, right? To strategize and plan their life in a way that even though they were in the avodas parech, no less than their husbands, but they never lost sight of the geula and they never gave up. The men, they lost hope. The husbands weren't able to hold on to the hope of geula and the pain of the galus. And to hold emotions that are complex is a woman's koach. And that's something that we all have, okay? So I think when you ask me, how do I connect this to marriage in the most practical terms? Yes, it would be so nice if your husband was the one who came to you and said, let's work on our marriage. Let's make time to have a date night. Let's go away once a month. Let's book a Shabbos in a hotel once a year for our anniversary. Let's go and buy you whatever will make you happy, right? Of course, that would be very nice if your husband would do that. And I give a bracha to every Jewish woman that her husband should be that kind of man who's the mashpia, who's connected to his mashpia kohos as the masculine and bestows his goodness overflowing with good to his wife. But the reality is that in most marriages, that's not what's happening. And if we're going to sit around and wait, again, if we're just going to wait and just fool ourselves when really what HaKadosh Baruch Hu perhaps is expecting of us is to strategize and do, then we're missing the boat. And this is where Slamim Asad Vatzikachehu. Vatzikachehu, I'm going to use this, I'm going to not chas v'shalom, give my own parish to the pasta because chas v'shalom that I would do that. But Vatzikachehu. She'll take him. She'll bring him. Let's say that she's going to desire that svadeh. She's going to dream and strategize about this wealth of growth. Asada is the place of life, right? And she sees that vision and she says, that's the kind of marriage that I want. I want a marriage of growth. I want a marriage like a Gan Eden. And I'm going to make sure that this happens. And she's not going to just sit around and wait for her husband to take the first step. Rather, she's going to be the one who comes towards him. And when a woman does that, and she's able to, again, with anaba, come towards her husband. Once she's in that space, that's where the letting go and being comes in. Because a woman is so attracted when right? Once she's taken that step and she's come towards her husband, the total surrender of, I'm here and I'm available and I want to connect with you and I want to be the right wife for you. And now I'm letting go. There's no patronizing, there's no lecturing, there's no guilting your husband, there's no shoulds and coulds, right? It's just, hi, I'm here. Okay. And that's the koach that a woman has. So this is true about every area of her marriage, right? The parts of the marriage that are more technical, the parts that are more emotional, the parts that are very deep and wholesome, where the more a woman can plan, even though we would think, oh, well, if a relationship is good and if a relationship is flourishing, things will just spontaneously happen. And the truth that it doesn't work like that. And we see that from Chazal. Chazal command a Jewish husband to spend time with his wife and fulfill all of her needs on all levels. And there's a conversation in the Gemara of how often the man has this obligation, okay? And it's dependent on his profession. If he's a sailor and he's out at sea and he's gone and he's only home twice a year, then his mitzvah is twice a year. Whereas if he sleeps at home, he's in the same home with his wife, he sees her often, but he's busy. So then his mitzvah is twice a week. So a husband has to carve out time to connect with his wife. So again, we see here, yes, of course, it's the chiyuv that a husband has to ensure he's the mashpia, he's the masculine. He should make sure to be mashpia on his wife. But a woman's avoda is to make space for that. And that's where we see the wisdom of Chazal. They don't say, well, just leave everything up to spontaneity. And when you and your husband will be in the mood to spend time together or to take a walk together or to go away together for a vacation or to just sit down and have a chat, then you'll do it. No, Chazal are teaching us that there's strategy involved, that there's planning involved. It needs to be intentional. And that like flies in the face of what we've all been brainwashed that true love, quote unquote, is something that you fall into and it just happens, right? No, it doesn't.
You're showing us from the source, from the psukim, from the Gemara, how much it's the exact opposite and how much really, a couple of things just came to mind when you were speaking. First of all, the fact that this is a tool that we have, that this is something that's special to us, that you were saying that, you know, a husband's co-hosts are in building IKEA cabinets. I mean, many, many, many other things as well. But that's their strength. Their strength is the physical and ours the emotional. That means that it's our tool. That means that it's highlighted in our toolbox. And to know that gives me a lot of empowerment, gives me a lot of chizuk of, oh, I have this. I can do this. Hashem gave me this within our marriage. Hashem gave the woman this tool within the marriage, and it's my achrayus to use that tool the same way that it's his achrayus to use his tools. But it's my achrayus to use this tool. And the beauty of, like you kept on saying, with the being strategic, being a doer, being a planner, but then also giving space. And how when you this balance of doing and planning, like I would say planning first and strategizing and then ultimately doing, but then once you do, being available and just being and being there and being present. And I think that it's an avoda for our whole lives, and every marriage, every couple, every individual it's a whole world. But this idea of planning and strategizing and then letting go and being is very eye-opening to me. It's very concrete. It's a big tool. It's something that I could take back or to Hashem tried to implement. Okay, so with that, Faigy, we're going to start wrapping up. Is there anything that you want to say or to summarize to tie up this idea?
Yeah. So a thought that came to my mind as you're asking me this question was, women will often say to me, okay, so I get it. I want to implement the change and I'm ready to take even a bold step. Like I've had women who I've had this list to work with and, hold their hand as they walk their journey on, in transforming their marriage. Some women married as long as myself. And in fact, one of my dear clients, really, she's at this point, I would consider her more a friend even than a client. She said to me a great line. She said at some point she was making very bold changes in her marriage, which takes zamima. It takes that, it's like a bold action to, especially when you've been married for many years, to, try to make changes and request changes. So she's got a great sense of humor. And she wrote to her husband the following note. She said, I'm going through this process, as you know. I'm going to someone once a week, and I'm working on our marriage. And she didn't share, which rightfully so, a woman shouldn't share as she's going through the process, what's coming up and what she's working on. She should just take the action steps that need to be taken, and she can share everything else with another woman if she needs to, who will get it. But basically, she came up with this great line. She said, I'm rebooting our marriage. Some programs will no longer be running, and the new ones haven't downloaded yet. So even after decades of marriage, it's never too late for us to make changes, but sometimes that change does require a bold step. So there's always that like moment in time where you're going in one direction, and then you're blessed with insight from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Insight is always from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whether it comes from within you or whether it comes from without, but it's always an insight is always from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there's like a moment which you might not even consciously be aware of where suddenly you veer off a little bit and you start a new course. Okay. And you're now on a little bit of a different path, which is going to take you to a completely different place, to a much better place. And that always begins with a very small commitment and an action. And very often, that first action after the decision made inside of like, I want different, I want more, I want deeper, I want closer, will often begin with, and now how do I include my husband? What do I do with this now? So I want to change our marriage, but my husband didn't necessarily have this insight that I just did. How do I make that change? So first of all, in marriage, right, Ezer Kenegdo, as you quoted, there's this, it's almost like this balancing act going on where when you make change, when you take a step to make a change, by definition, just the fact that you decided to make a change and took a little step towards making a change will shift the dynamic. But when something more Lisa is needed and you need to take that first step, very often that first step will be verbally communicating to your husband. So let's start with the example of wanting to spend more time together, which is something that women struggle with all the time. Women might reach out to me because they're feeling just like a loss, like this loss of excitement. The spark is gone. Everything feels like a chore. Things that are meant to feel connecting feel like a to-do list. And just this like life is gone. And very often that first step we'll notice, we'll try to track, when did you lose that spark? What happened? When did the light go out? And very often it'll become very apparent to us in the first session already that we used to spend more time together. And then Baruch Hashem, like happened, and we don't spend as much time together. Time is a need for many women, just to spend some time together and bond. So very often the first bold step will be communicating to the husband your need for spending more time. And if you've settled into a certain rut and you've been like that for 5 months, 5 years, or 5 decades, it's going to be very hard to just come to your husband one day and say, can we spend some time together? Now, some women will have an easier time doing this. And for other women, the question will be at the tip of their tongue 10 times a day for 37 days before they can actually get it out. So this is where I encourage women to be bold, meaning not to be afraid to take that step and come to your husband and request more time. Request planning time together, meaning not just leaving it up to, well, if by the end of the day we still have koch and the kids are asleep and everything's in place, yeah, then we'll go for a walk together. But rather prioritizing it that we are going to build our time around this sacred space that we are going to create of connecting with each other in whatever form the couple chooses to connect. And the way to go about that, and this is so important, I think this is the biggest takeaway. I think it goes along with the notion of the mipri kapeh natakarim. She doesn't directly plant the vineyard. It's through her actions she's able to then acquire a vineyard that's named on her name because, again, that energy of strategizing, but in such a feminine way. So very often, most women, we make a mistake when we speak to our husbands. We go into language and we start to reason. We start to explain to him why we should be spending more time together. Or we go into, we used to spend so much time together. Now, what a husband hears when a woman starts explaining to him why he should do X, Y, or Z, even if you say we, he's hearing it as you're a failure, you're a failure, you're a failure, you're a failure, you're a failure. And when a man feels like a failure, when he feels that he's failing to make the woman in his life happy, it shuts him down. Okay. So either he'll slump and he'll just lose that masculine energy, that tall, erect masculine energy. So he'll slump, or he'll shut down, or he'll defend, right? He's not going to turn around and say, "Oh, my dear, lovely wife, let's go for a walk right now." It doesn't open that energy in him. So when a woman is talking brain to brain, which brain is always masculine, the moach is always the masculine, like Hama, like the sun is masculine. We go brain to brain. That's when we lose the discussion before we even started. The way for a woman to communicate these needs, especially when she's coming and trying to make a change, is to go from the heart. What would that look like? Instead of coming to her husband and rationalizing and explaining to him why they should be spending time together, she comes with a very simple request. "I miss walking with you. It would make me so happy if we go for a walk tonight. Can we?" And that opens in a man naturally his masculine desire to give to the woman. It makes him feel full of the ability to give. It makes him feel like this woman here trusts that I can fill her. And that's a game changer. When we learn to communicate like that, I can't make guarantees or promises, but I've just seen this happen so many times. When we learn to be in that state of anava, of sharing a desire and a wish from our heart without explaining anything, almost without fail, husbands are going to turn around and give the wife what she requested. So it's a vulnerable place of being willing to ask. But when you ask that way, very often the answer will be yes.
That's beautiful. I can't thank you enough, Faigy. I feel like you took this whole pasuk and reframed it in my mind of what Zamama could be, what Zamama is, what a field is in our lives, and what a vineyard is in our lives. I can't thank you enough for enlightening us with this idea of being feminine planners and still showing up and just being. And for me, I can say that the biggest thing that I took from this is the koach of planning, but also being and learning how to balance the two. So thank you so much. And if you're interested in hearing more from Faigy, we're going to have a link in the show notes to sign up for her emails, as well as another link which will allow you to access her courses. And if you want to reach out to Faigy now, you can reach out at office@unblockyourway.co.il. Faigy has many, many things to offer. I love reading her emails. And we can't thank you enough, Faigy. Thank you so, so much. Please reach out and email us with any questions or thoughts. We would love to hear from you. Stay tuned for some more good vibes.